Okay, so imagine an illness, a plague, where the only symptom is that you literally can't stop dancing. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale, right? But we're about to dive into a real historical event from 1518, where hundreds of people were swept up in a dance they couldn't control, sometimes even to their deaths.
Our story starts in a city called Strasbourg, in the middle of a blazing hot summer. But the heat was the least of their worries. Something truly bizarre, something that felt like a walking nightmare, was about to unfold on their streets.
So, it all starts with just one person, a woman named Frau Trophäa. She just walks out into the middle of the street, and with no music, no party, nothing, she starts to dance. And she doesn't stop, for hours. Then, for days. No food, no water, no rest. Just this endless, silent, frantic movement.
And this is where it gets really wild. The escalation was just terrifyingly fast. What started with Frau Trophäa, well, it spread. A week later, you have over 30 people doing the same thing. It's like their bodies were hijacked. And by the end of 1 month, we're talking about 400 people caught in this bizarre, deadly dance.
The big question is how? How could something like this possibly happen? To even begin to understand, you have to look at the world these people were living in. This didn't just happen in a vacuum. It happened in a city that was already pushed to its absolute breaking point. Strasbourg back then was, well, it was a pressure cooker. They were dealing with a terrible famine. They were being ravaged by diseases like smallpox. People were poor. They were starving. They were sick. And on top of all that physical misery, there was this intense spiritual fear. They genuinely believed that all this suffering was a curse, a punishment sent from heaven. And they had a very, very specific fear. There was this belief in a saint, Saint Vitus, who they thought could curse people, specifically with a dancing plague, if they sinned. And keep that in mind, because that single belief is going to be absolutely key to how this whole crisis was understood and, tragically, how it was handled.
So what was really going on here? For centuries, people have tried to figure this out. So let's do our own little investigation, put on our detective hats, and look at the main theories behind this historical cold case.
Now, the official response from the city's leaders at the time was something else. Their leading medical theory was something called overheated blood. And their cure, you're not going to believe this, was more dancing.
Yeah.
They thought the victims had to just dance it out. They actually built stages and hired musicians to keep them going. The result? A total catastrophe. People just started dying from heart attacks, strokes, and pure exhaustion. All right, let's move on to our first modern suspect, a physical cause. There's a theory about something called ergot poisoning. Ergot is this toxic mold that grows on rye, which was a major part of their diet. And if you eat it, it can cause some pretty nasty symptoms, including muscle spasms and hallucinations. So on the surface, it kind of makes sense, right? But here's where that theory kind of falls apart. Ergotism also does this nasty thing where it cuts off blood flow to your limbs, which can lead to gangrene. It's really hard to imagine someone with those symptoms having the coordination or the stamina to dance for days straight. The symptoms just don't quite line up with what was actually reported.
So if it wasn't a fungus, what was it? This brings us to the theory that most historians and psychologists lean towards today. Mass psychogenic illness. You might have heard it called mass hysteria. The basic idea is that the cause isn't a poison or a germ, it's the mind. Under extreme, shared stress, a whole community can start to show real physical symptoms.
And remember that pressure cooker environment we talked about? Well, here's the recipe. You've got the foundation, a community under unimaginable stress. You've got the shared belief that Saint Vitus can send a dancing curse. Then, you get the trigger, Frau Trophäa dancing in the street. And from there, it just spreads through social contagion, like a psychological virus.
Now, there is one more theory out there, a bit of a curveball. Some historians wonder if this wasn't an illness at all. Could it have been some kind of bizarre, trance-like religious ritual that just got way out of hand? Maybe a desperate plea for help, directed at the very saint they were all so afraid of.
But here's the thing. Just as mysteriously as this whole plague started, it eventually ended. The frantic energy that had gripped this city for weeks, it just faded away.
So after realizing their more dancing plan was a complete disaster, the authorities did a total 180. They banned all public music and dancing.
They rounded up the remaining dancers and forced them on a pilgrimage to a shrine dedicated to, you guessed it, Saint Vitus. Rituals were performed, and by early September, it was all over.
But no one really knew why it stopped. Was it the new plan? Did it just burn itself out? No one could say for sure. There was no cure found, no single cause ever identified. The music just stopped. The streets went quiet, and the whole event became one of history's most chilling, unsolved mysteries.
So what was it, really? A poison in their food that drove them all mad?
A desperate act of religious faith that spun wildly out of control? Or, and this is maybe the most unsettling thought of all, was it just proof of the terrifying power of our own minds to turn our deepest, darkest fears into a physical reality? That is the haunting question the dancing plague of 1518 leaves behind.